Welcome to the story behind the glory with On 3. And today we have the pleasure of chatting with Alan Hedrick, former head strength and conditioning coach at Colorado State University, Pueblo. Alan, good morning. How are you today?
Excellent. And yourself?
I'm great. And where are you?
I am in Pusol, Spain, which is just outside of Valencia, 15 or 20 minutes north of Valencia, Spain.
Awesome. And is that where you currently live? Are you vacationing or working?
Yeah, we've been living here for a little over a year and a half now.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive in. I am really curious, to, go back to some of your roots about the CSU Pueblo football program and how you got involved with that and how you build it really from the ground up. Can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. So that's kind of starting at the end of my career. But yeah, that's fine. We can go from there. So I ended up staying 11 years there. So let me backtrack just a little bit. So I was the head strength coach at the Air Force Academy for about 11 years. And then they brought in a new coach, and that new coach wanted to go in a different direction with the strength and conditioning program, which often happens at the collegiate level. And so I was fortunate enough to go to work at the National Strength and Conditioning Association, which is also in Colorado Springs, as is the Air Force Academy. So I went to work at the NSCA and worked there for about 3 years. It was a good job. They were very fair with my compensation, but I really missed coaching athletes, working in a weight room, being in that environment. So they brought the football program back at CSU Pueblo after about a 20-year hiatus. And the second year of the program, during the second game of the second season, they got a strength coach position approved at CSU Pueblo. One of the coaches on the CSU Pueblo staff at the time had worked at the Air Force Academy with me. He was aware that I was available, and the head coach at CSU Pueblo, John Riston, contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in the position at CSU Pueblo. It was somewhat of a difficult situation in that it represented a significant decrease in pay for me, but that's where my passion lied in terms of working as a strength conditioning program at the collegiate level. And through a lot of convincing of my wife, I went ahead and accepted the position at CSU Pueblo. So that's how I ended up at CSU Pueblo. That ended up being at CSU Pueblo for around 11 seasons before my retirement. It was a unique situation in that, like I said, so it was a startup program. I actually volunteered their first year helping them out before going to work at the NSCA. And so it was, like I said, a unique situation starting a program up. I can remember telling the athletes at a meeting that this first year was going to be the most important year we had, in that it's much easier to establish what's the word I'm looking for? To establish an environment rather than recreate an environment. So it was good in that we were able to establish the program, establish the environment that we wanted within the strength and conditioning program that first year or two. So I didn't have to undo anything. It was starting from square one, and we were able to establish that environment that we wanted to work in from day one. So from that aspect, it was a pretty unique situation.
And tell me more about the environment that you like to create, day one to sort of keep that foundation, rock solid?
Yeah, I put a big emphasis on training with one, great intensity, but more than that, with great technique. I wanted my athletes, with whatever they were doing in the weight room, out on the field, to always perform with great technique. So yes, I wanted them to be very, very aggressive with their approach and training, but um, never at the risk of reducing their technique. I always felt like this: if I was coaching and another strength coach happened to randomly walk into the room and watch my athletes training, I wanted that strength coach to be very impressed with what he saw in terms of how he saw my athletes training. So, um, technique, great technique, followed by great intensity is what we're really looking for.
And was that challenging, or can you share with us, a challenging moment, where for the beginnings of a program, how you got the athletes to be so precise, in their technique? Was there ever a moment of high frustration where they didn't necessarily quite understand the reasoning behind what you were coaching?
So, a lot of people ask that question. They would come in and say, how do you get your athletes to lift so well? How do you get them to train so well? It was actually very simple. So I'll use this example. So um, let's say in our strength conditioning complex, there were 12 squat racks or 12 platforms, for example, right? So potentially I had 12 athletes performing squats at the same time, right? We worked on a timed system so that all 12 athletes would step up and perform their set at the same time, right? So I had 12 athletes lifting at the same time. We emphasized taking our squats to parallel or lower during training. So again, using this example, let's say I had 11 athletes squatting correctly and one athlete squatting had too much weight and he wasn't able to take it to the depth that we were looking for. And so all I had to do was this: I would stop the entire group, correct the mistake, and then make everyone start over, right? So all of a sudden, the athlete who was making the mistake had a great deal of peer pressure on him, right? So I didn't really have to yell or scream. I simply coached the mistake, had the entire group start over, and the problem was easily self-corrected at that point. So it was pretty effective but easy system to get the athletes to perform to the technique that we were looking for.
And did you find that, implementing that style system, did that create camaraderie right around the other athletes and that athlete who hadn't performed correctly, to where there was a real support system? Or did you, or was, strength built through having to persevere?
It's kind of a combination. Sometimes the teammates who are having to perform that set over would be a little frustrated, to say the least. But at other times, they would be very supportive, and rally around the athlete who had made a mistake, rally around the other 11 who had to perform the set again and attack it that way. So um, either thing that occurred was a positive for me because we got them perform the exercise how we wanted to see it performed. So,
You mentioned the word, you like your athletes to train intensely. What does intensity mean to you?
that's a great question. It's like, I don't know if it's appropriate to say, but, some people say, well, I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it, right? So it's the same thing. I don't know if I could give you a great definition, but I definitely know when I see it. One thing that I told my athletes over and over is we want to make sure that they were training to win. So not just training, but training to win. So training at an intensity would allow them to more effectively compete at a high level.
Got it. And I can imagine that at some point, confidence and enthusiasm really started to build because you ended up being, the top team in the nation, if I recall, correct? Can you share with me, how the culture grew from really ground up to, being a national champion?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty quick process in that they brought the program back, and I think it was year 7, maybe year 8 that we won a national championship. So the program hadn't been in existence or back in existence for a very long period of time, but we were able to have success pretty quickly. So in that, for example, even that first year, the team ended up with a winning record, and um, pretty quickly we started winning conference championships. We ended up winning I think 8 or 9 conference championships in a row prior to and after that national championship year. So success built on success, right? So one big thing that I saw is the more successful we were, the better quality of athletes we were able to recruit. So athletes who were being recruited on year 3, for example, wouldn't have been being recruited on year 6 or 7. The more success we had, the easier it was for the coaches to recruit better and better football athletes. So really just kind of snowballed that way.
And you certainly have shared with us some of the expectations that you had of the athletes. Share what your style was with the rest of your staff. What expectations did you have of them? And what do you think that they would say about you to get the entire staff to be in lockstep?
Well, you're saying the entire staff, but it was me and one other person usually. So, at the Division II level, that's oftentimes the case. Occasionally we would have an intern, for example, but really I didn't rely on them for too much coaching. So I just let them know, and they saw through me what my expectation was in terms of the athletes perform the exercises again with great technique or with great intensity. And they soon bought into that, saw how successful it was in terms of making the group start over if someone wasn't performing a set correctly or an exercise correctly. So it was just kind of a mimicking effect where they would see what was happening, buy into that approach, and implement that pretty quickly. And obviously we talked to them. I talked to them about that as well, what the expectation was. But I think the most effective tool was just having them to be able to see how well it worked for me in getting what we wanted out of the athletes from the training. I tried to be very fair with my assistants. I wanted them to know that they were an important part of the staff, that I had respect for them and their abilities as well. I was relying on them to carry out the mission of what we were trying to accomplish. And I let them know that their efforts were appreciated.
Can you share with us a specific example of how you conveyed that?
Conveyed
That they were special, that you had trust in them. Was there a situation that you recall?
I don't know if there's one specific example, but I think that working. Let me explain the way our program was set up. So we split up our training program and the weight room like this. So our skill position athletes lift on the dumbbell side of the room. The room was basically split in half. So they lifted on the dumbbell side of the room twice a week and the barbell side of the room once a week. In contrast to that, our big skill position athletes lifted on the barbell side of the room twice a week and on the dumbbell side of the room once a week. So my assistant coaches constantly had the ability to observe how the athletes were being coached and saw the approach that we were taking. Um, I split up the workouts that way for a couple of reasons. One, um, I felt like I wanted to put a bigger emphasis on skill development, on motor skill ability, on balance and coordination with the skill position athletes. And so that's why we emphasize dumbbell training twice a week, because having to lift two separate implements rather than the barbell, I think that does a better job in terms of developing those type of skills. In contrast to that, with our big guys, was a bigger emphasis on, yes, we wanted them to be as athletic as possible, but there was a bigger emphasis on increases in strength. So we were able to split up the program that way. And as a result, the assistant coaches were able to work with the entire team as well, rather than just a specific group. And we're able to observe the training that was going on the barbell side. I coached on the barbell side, whereas the assistant coaches trained on the dumbbell side. They were able to observe the training that was going on and see the expectations that were being carried out during training.
Was the national championship the highlight of that period for you, or was there something else that made that period of time special?
There were a lot of special games, obviously, during the national championship year. But a couple seasons before that, we went up and played Kearney, who was a powerhouse at the time. And they were ranked very, very high in the national rankings. And we went to their place. It was a kind of disastrous trip in that the buses broke down. We were stuck out in the middle of nowhere for an extended period of time. And all the athletes had to get on one bus so they could get to the hotel. And then all the support staff was on the other bus. And so it was not the ideal situation to prepare for a game. I forget where we were ranked, somewhere top 20, I would, as I remember. But we went in and we played very, very well, and we were able to beat them at their place in front of their fans. And for me, that was one of my highlight games. Obviously, the national championship year, there were a number of very meaningful games, and it was a unique and rewarding season and series of events for sure.
That's great. Let's rewind a little bit. What got you interested in the Air Force? Because you spent, I think 10 plus years there.
Right.
That all come about?
Yeah. So I had a very unique career being in Colorado, because I went from working at the Olympic Training Center to the Air Force Academy to the NSCA to CSU Pueblo, and not having to move states at all. And that doesn't happen. Excuse me. That doesn't happen very often in our career field. So my first job coming out of college, I graduated with my master's degree from Fresno State. And while I was pursuing my master's degree, a position became available in North Dakota, the University of North Dakota. And we had a coach on the staff at Fresno State who had worked there. And I went ahead and applied for that position. And came down to myself and one other person. I went out and flew out, interviewed for the job. And they ended up giving the position to the other person, which made sense, which I found out later. He had been doing a job on an interim basis for about 6 months before the permanent job came open. And it was kind of a blessing in disguise. I'm from California originally, and trying to make the adjustment of living in North Dakota for me would have been horrendous with the weather situation there. So I was not selected for that position, ended up going to work at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. Initially, that was a 1-year appointment as a research assistant. And then while I was there, got evolved into a full-time job. So I ended up spending 3 years at the Olympic Training Center. It was a great position in that obviously I got to work with a lot of unique athletes. Um, the one thing that I really missed was I didn't really get to see my athletes compete very often. Most competitions were either nationally or internationally. And so I worked with the athletes, got them prepared for competition, but then didn't really get to watch them compete very often. I did, and I'm still doing a lot of publishing work on a couple of articles now. Um, it was an awesome place to work, surrounded by a lot of amazing people. Certainly, it's different frustrations working at any government job, but yeah, it was a great situation. I had the opportunity to work with Coach DeBerry, the head football coach there, for a number of years, and he was an amazing individual. So there are definitely a lot of positives, a lot of great experiences working at the Air Force Academy. One thing I would have to say is that my career has provided, so I never got rich financially, but in terms of the experiences that myself and my family were able to experience, it was really a tremendous career. I've got to do a lot of amazing things. For example, working at the Olympic Training Center, one of the teams that I worked with was Greco-Roman wrestling. And I developed a strong relationship with Matt Ghaffari, who was a Greco-Roman wrestler. And I worked with Matt for a couple of years leading up to the 96 Olympic Games. And he ended up winning a silver medal wrestling Alexander Karelin from Russia. And so just an example, my family and I went to the games, had some pretty unique experiences there. Before every match, Matt would call me back to where he was prior to his warm-up and then during his warm-up. So I was supposed to have credentials to get back there, but they would tell the person standing guard who I was, and they would let me go back. So just situations or experiences like that. I had the opportunity to travel to Japan and China 3 times each. On each of my trips to Japan, I took my wife and my daughter on a couple of trips with me. Had the opportunity to speak in Australia, and they asked me what I wanted for compensation to speak there. And I said, just fly my wife out with me, let her have that experience as well. So, it wasn't a financially rewarding career, but from the experience point of view, both for myself and my family, it was a pretty good environment, pretty good situation to be in for sure.
Tell me more about the opportunity, to train, with the Olympians. I know, you train, Matt in Greco-Roman wrestling,
Yeah.
bodybuilding and speed skating. Highlight for us some of the differentiators that you saw, in that level of athlete.
So I wrote the program for Bonnie for leading up to the Olympics. They came out, the speed skating group came out as a group, and I had the opportunity to train with her during their camp, which was a short period of time, a week or two. One thing that the coach pointed out to me, I designed some pretty demanding programs for the speed skating program, for example. And, one comment that the coach made to me was like, whatever you tell them to do, and obviously Bonnie was a leader in that group because of the success that she had, anything that you tell them to do, they're going to do very, very well. So you need to be aware of that, right? In terms of being careful not to overload them. But yeah, so whatever was on the program, they were going to do and attack to the best of their ability. With Matt, he had the work character of a much lighter athlete. Matt weighed, he wrestled at 130 kilos, but he trained like a much lighter athlete in terms of training a couple times a day. He was definitely in extraordinary shape every time that he wrestled. So the work ethic demonstrated by both of those athletes was outstanding. Working at the Olympic Training Center, people think I only worked with very, very high level athletes, but there were a lot of camps that came in who were nowhere near Olympic level. But it certainly was a great environment to work in. And, one of the biggest benefits for me, I think, was just being able to put that work experience on my resume. Working at the Olympic Training Center brings an automatic level of respect. So it was a quality situation for me, not only from the experiences I had, but being able to have that position on my resume.
Yeah, I'd love to dive a little into more detail on, Matt and Greco-Roman style wrestling, because that's a pretty technical style, right? Involving a lot more throwing. Being a terrific athlete, share with me how you got him so technically sound, right? Because it may have just been a difference of a position of a grip or something like that, right? Help give the edge.
So I'm not even going to attempt to take credit for anything in terms of his skill on the mat. That was from him and his wrestling coaches. And so I'm not even going to pretend that I had anything to do with his ability technique wise on the mat. But I can relay a story to you that kind of plays into that. So one thing that Matt wanted to be able to do more effectively was to be able to push his opponent outside the mat, off the mat, outside the ring that lined the mat. And so I was like, okay, that's something that I can directly affect. So at the time I had a Toyota 4-wheel drive pickup, and I was working at the academy at the time, and Matt would come up during free time and I would train him. So we would take the truck out to a hill, not a slight incline, but certainly enough of an incline to be challenging. The truck set up high enough that he would push on the tailgate. So it was in a pretty sport-specific position. And so we just had him perform a series of pushes up the hill with the truck. I ended up with handprints all over the back tailgate from him pushing that truck up the hill. A couple of times people would drive by and ask if we needed help. They thought the truck had stalled and he was trying to push the truck uphill so we could get it to a point where we could get it fixed. But just an example of being able to address a specific thing that he was trying to improve and work on that in a strength and conditioning program.
And earlier you mentioned how, these Olympic athletes were going to do whatever you told them, right? Because they're high achievers.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the feel, as a coach, to not over push, to not overdo. What were some of the things that you would look for, right? Because you're trying to get the most out of them. But as you said earlier, you don't want to overtrain them either. What were some of your techniques to make sure you were finding that sweet spot?
One of the obvious things is just watching them train, seeing how well they're able to perform what they're being asked to perform. The work that I always wanted to make sure that my athletes did was to take great records of their training. So we had a complete list of the weight that they were using, the reps that they were completing. We had that in front of us. So we could compare workout to workout to see how today's workout compared to the last time they performed a specific workout, and just in general, speaking with the athlete before training even started, asking them how they felt, how they were doing, um, how they felt physically and mentally, just having a conversation with them to kind of get a feel of how they were doing. And at times, we could certainly make adjustments in the workout. If Matt came in, for example, and said, we got killed on the mat today. Coaches were really pushing us hard. We could back off their training a little bit, just make some adjustments that way. So, it's just a matter of observing them and having a conversation with them prior to training starting. And then certainly, obviously, during the training period itself, if you could see that they were struggling with anything, not performing as you would expect them to perform, we could back off the intensity that way as well.
Did you feel like something was missing, or that you weren't quite at all, not being able to see them compete, and that you only got to see the coaching side? Or did you feel that or did you feel like fulfilled?
No, I don't. I mean, certainly it's advantageous to be able to watch your athletes compete, not just from a coaching standpoint, but from a personal satisfaction standpoint. It's rewarding to be able to train your athlete and then watch them go compete at a better and a higher level. But I think most of it was just a reduction in job satisfaction in terms of not being able to watch the athletes compete. It was just not as satisfying as it could be because you missed out on that aspect of their athletic lives. Excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to get a drink of water.
Sure. You bet. No, and no worries at all. Let's switch gears for a minute. Give us a moment where you were early on in the pursuit of something, and the process was really clumsy and difficult for you.
And there were times when I would take on working with a team, and they weren't familiar with my expectations. Was we were establishing a new relationship, and I certainly would get frustrated that they weren't buying in as strongly as I would have liked, or training at a level that I was satisfied with. So I think that was probably, the most common frustration. But even working at CSU Pueblo, even during our national championship year, for example, at the Division II level, training during the entire summer is completely voluntary. No mandatory training at all. So we could have a great turnout. The vast majority of the athletes were there, but it would just it's very frustrating for me. If we have, let's say we had 65 athletes in town, 63 of them were at any given training session, for example. Coach would come in and be excited about having such a big group in there and training it. And for me, it's like, yeah, we got those two guys that aren't showing up today, and they should be here as well. So it's always, for me, unless we were getting 100%, attendance 100% of the time, it was always going to be a frustration for me. I wanted everyone there buying in and working towards a common goal. So, I always told them after we started winning championships, I told them, what do you think the most important championship is? And they look, we had in the stadium, they're all lined up year after year. And maybe that year, this year, I was like, no, that's not the most important championship. The most important one is the next one, right? The next one, that's what we're working for, and we need everyone here working toward that next championship, not something that's already been accomplished. It's nice, one of our supporters, SCHU Pueblo, gave us jackets with the national championship emblem on the back and the year. And it was a very generous gift. And he gave it to a number of the coaches and support staff. But I was very reluctant to wear it, especially during a game, because it was like celebrating something where we had already accomplished. I didn't want to celebrate something we had accomplished. I wanted to celebrate something or work towards something that we wanted to accomplish, not something that we had accomplished.
So it almost sounds to me like the journey of getting to a championship was more significant to you than the actual championship, because that was really just a picture, if you will, in time.
Well, I don't know if I'd say that. I mean, winning a national championship was extraordinarily rewarding, but from that point on, anything less than winning a national championship was a disappointment. We could have a record of 10-2 and be ranked top 3 or 4 in the country. But if you didn't win a national championship, after having done so, it was still left a bad taste in your mouth, After having accomplished that goal, anything less than that, repeating that accomplishment was unsatisfactory.
And for you, pursuing excellence year after year to win another championship, talk to us about how you would digest, say, that championship year, and yet go find little things to improve upon. What was your routine, if you will, after a winning season like that, to still find more?
I always said that if I ever got to a point in my career where I felt like the program that I was providing to my athletes was perfect, then that was when I needed to resign or quit. And there's no such thing as a perfect program. You can always make improvements. So I use my summers to review my programs and make those adjustments, looking at things, finding things that I could implement that made sense to me with my approach to training, that I could implement into the program and make it even better. So there are always little things. I never really was that interested in what necessarily other coaches were doing. I wanted to find out primarily through the journals that the National Strength and Conditioning Association produce. I wanted to get information from what science was telling us had been shown to be effective, and implement those types of changes into our program. Now, maybe a coach was doing a specific thing and they were being successful, but you're like, oh yeah, but I'll use this as an example. The strength coach at Alabama is doing this, and they're having a tremendous amount of success. And I think, well, if I was recruiting the type of athletes that they recruit at Alabama, I could probably be pretty successful doing almost anything, So I want to rely more on what science is telling us, not what some coach is telling us. I'm not being disrespectful to any specific program or to Alabama, even, for example, but it's hard to evaluate the effectiveness of a specific training technique in that environment. Whereas if science is telling us that, yeah, this has been shown to be safe and effective, then yeah, let's make use of what we're being told is going to help us out to get better.
And I can imagine that that would have helped your athletes understand, the reasoning behind you doing what you were doing, because you could perhaps point to the science as, facts.
Yeah, it's interesting though. I can remember um, speaking to my athletes at the Air Force Academy, and I kind of use this analogy, so we had our program, but then we added things onto the program to make it even better. And a lot of the things were unique. For example, I'll use the example. So I used to like to put a time component on our set and rep scheme. So if they're doing squats, for example, and they're doing 4 sets of 6. So if we're in a power cycle, I would put a time component on it where they're doing 4 sets of 6, but they have to complete the 6 reps in 8 seconds, which has the effect of shifting the emphasis from how much can I lift to how fast can I move this weight. Research tells us that as long as the attempt is there to lift the weight as quickly as possible, you're going to get improvements in power. And that's just one example of the type of things that, that we would implement in the program. But a lot of times the athletes are kind of reluctant to that, even when being explained the benefit of it. So I said, I'm providing you these cupcakes with all these sprinkles on it. And a lot of you guys want to scrape the sprinkles off and just eat the basic cupcake, enjoy the sprinkles, because they're good too. So, we just try to get them to take full advantage of everything that we're trying to do.
Can you share with us a moment where you had to persevere? And maybe it was a moment of failure or not, but a moment, where you were at one of your low points. And I'm curious what that was and how'd you pull out of it?
Some specific examples. Well, I'll go on it this way. So I was working with a team at CSU Pueblo, and for a number of years, and we had a lot of success. The program had performed well. One season, we were like one game away from winning a conference championship. But one season, they opened up, and I think they were like 0-10 to start the season, right? So all of a sudden, the coach calls me and is blaming their lack of success on the training program. So I was working with these athletes and training them correctly for their sport demands. But the coach was concerned that they weren't getting enough endurance training, and so wanted to change the program dramatically. This was after years of success, after years of being successful. All of a sudden, there was a problem with their training program, and that's where the fault lie. So, in those situations, it was extremely frustrating that those situations occurred. And that happened a couple of times in my career.
And how'd you take that? When the coach was blaming you and the strength program, but was that personal, or was that like, hey, he doesn't get it, or what was your reaction to that?
Probably not as mature as I should have been, to be honest with you. They wanted to go in a completely different direction, doing circuit training with high repetitions, completely opposite of the sport demands. And so I had a person who was working as a GA with me at the time. And so I gave the program over to him so he could go supervise the program that the coaches wanted implemented. So I just completely handed it off. I didn't want to be involved with that. approach. I felt like it was completely inappropriate for the sport, and I did not want to be involved training the athletes incorrectly.
I want to ask you, I want to go back to your some of your experiences, and specifically traveling abroad to Japan and China. And I didn't get a lot of context around those travels, but I am curious if visiting those countries for 3 different times, as you said, did you learn anything new from a coaching standpoint going to those countries? Was there anything that you were able to bring back with you that you thought that they did really well to enhance?
It wasn't really that type of situation in that, um, I was lecturing in a classroom setting, not really in a weight room setting. So I wasn't really observing any training that was going on to say, oh, yeah, that's a great idea. That makes sense to me. Um, so it was kind of a difficult environment to be in to take those types of things away from me, take away from the experience. Certainly, the experience themselves were amazing. Getting to travel with China and Japan and seeing those countries and those cultures and being in those environments. Um, you know, um, Very, very meaningful to me to be able to do that. But it wasn't really an environment or a situation that gave me the opportunity to learn a lot from them. It's interesting. One of the things I spoke at in China on one of my trips was the value of using weightlifting in the training program of non-weightlifting athletes. I'm talking about Olympic lifting, right? So as you probably know, China is a world leader in weightlifting competition. But the training method of using weightlifting for non-weightlifting athletes wasn't really accepted. They looked at it as a separate sport rather than as something that could be implemented into their sport to make their athletes better. And I was lecturing on the value of weightlifting for non-weightlifting athletes. And afterwards, I saw a group of attendees talking, and then one of them came up to me and through the interpreter said, we've decided that we agree with you that weightlifting can be of value to our athletes. So that was kind of a cool experience to have that happen and have that shared with me.
Yeah, and I'm curious, how big was the audience that you were lecturing to, and what was that demographic?
So in China, most of the lectures were relatively classroom, what you would consider a typical classroom size, 20 to 30 athletes at the most. In Japan, I spoke at their national conference a couple of times. And so obviously the audience there was much larger. It was interesting, the contrast between those two cultures. That was very enlightening to me.
Tell me more about that.
I'll try to say it without being disrespectful. So in Japan, the people are extraordinarily respectful. Everything, high level of respect. We learn very quickly not to say that we like something or we wanted anything, because if we said it, it would happen. I like Diet Coke, and all of a sudden Diet Coke is showing up every time I go back to the hotel at the end of the session. Extraordinarily respectful people. I was speaking at a conference, and happened to be, it was in Tokyo, and it was snowing, extraordinarily cold. It's not that normal, not unheard of, but not normal in Tokyo. And so we were at a university, and in the hallway, in the area outside of the lecture hall, where people were coming in, and the people from the NSC who were working the event were obviously very, very cold. And the door to the venue was propped open. And so my wife happened to go up and said, "Why are you leaving the door open when it's so cold?" And the answer she got was that I might want to go outside. And so they were keeping the door open for me just in case I wanted to go outside. And she was like, "Close the door and get warm, you know." But they went out of their way to show respect and appreciation. In contrast to that, in China, I was lecturing in a classroom size lecture environment. And one of the coaches there got a phone call during the middle of my lecture, took the call and spoke at a normal voice, normal speaking level during the middle of the lecture, which apparently was the norm in China, but would have never been accepted in Japan. So even though, a lot of for example, the architecture is very, very similar from Japan and China. But from a cultural situation, obviously some huge differences in those two cultures. So it's just one example that I could think of that was an example of the marked differences between those two countries.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Is there another, role or hobby that looks particularly interesting to you?
So like I said earlier, I do a lot of publishing. Authored a couple books. I've authored a large number of journal articles. After I retired, I had a unique retirement in that it happened during when COVID was first starting. And so this was like in April, maybe, and I was going to retire in May, or maybe it was in March. But at any rate, we ended up closing the university. So we were no longer in person at the university. And so I ended my career at the house, completely separate from the university and the coaches and the athletes that I've been working with. So that was kind of a unique situation. What was the original question?
Is there another career?
Oh, yeah.
Role?
Yeah. So after I retired, I didn't do any writing for about a year. I just didn't feel like it, didn't have the motivation to want to do it. And so one nice thing about writing voluntarily is you can write when you want to and not write when you don't want to. So I didn't write at all, actually, until we were here in Spain for a while. And then I decided I wanted to renew that, something that I like to do. Originally, I was a journalism major before I switched over to exercise science. Writing comes easier to me, and don't ask me to do any math problems for you. But I like and enjoy writing. Something I enjoy doing. I enjoy the process of putting articles together. And so writing is definitely something that I continue to enjoy, something I like to do. Another thing, completely unrelated, I have a drone that I have, and I get a lot of enjoyment out of flying the drone and shooting videos and then using the video editor and putting videos together from the drone. Is kind of a fun little hobby that I have.
Hey,
Yeah.
The last question I have for you that's tying into one of your previous answers is, if you were going to write another book, what would you write about?
I think that probably just on my experiences as a strength coach, working with the athletes, and then how to use those experiences to make yourself a better coach. I think that one thing I really liked working as a strength and conditioning coach is that, so I wasn't in a role of deciding who makes a team or who doesn't make the team, who starts, who doesn't start, who's first team, second team, third team. None of those things were tied to me. And so I felt like I was able to have a different relationship with the athletes than were the sports coaches for that reason. So, I have a sarcastic sense of humor. I enjoy teasing the athletes, joking around with them. That's something that they would definitely remember from me, I'm sure. So that was one thing that I was able to do that I might not be able to do as I was if I was their actual sports coach. Just a relationship that I was able to develop. And then, I think that if the athletes realize that you care for them, that you like them as a person, you want to see them improve, you want to see them be successful, that helps them buy in to what we're asking them to do. I can remember a specific story, and I didn't remember it, but the athlete himself told me this. Happened when I was working at the Air Force Academy. Like most strength and conditioning coaches, I was the get back coach during game day, right? And so I was walking up and down the sideline. We ran the option at the Air Force Academy, and during a specific play, our quarterback evidently had made a good play, had made a good decision, and I was watching by one of the backup quarterbacks who was a year or two behind him, and I just said, that's going to be you in a year or two. And to me, it was kind of not that big of a thing, but to him, later on, he relayed to me that really struck him, that I recognized that in him and made that comment to him. So you can be pretty impactful with your comments with your athletes. And so having that relationship with them is just so valuable, so important.
That's terrific. Yeah, you never know, right? What impact you may be having unbeknownst to you.
Yeah, I mean, he told me later on, I don't think it was the same year, but he brought it up and said, remember when you said that? And so it was kind of cool to hear that from him, that it was impactful to him as well.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Story Behind the Glory. Stay up to date with On3 for our latest episodes by following On3 on social media at On3 Stories.